So welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to our presentation, Presenting at QSEN, Tips and Tricks for a Successful Presentation. So as we get started, I want to give a special thanks to my team. My name is David James. I'm an advanced practice nurse / nursing professional development specialist at the University of Alabama at Birmingham Hospital. I also serve as an adjunct at the UAB School of Nursing. I want to give a very special thanks to my other team members, Dr. Mickelson and Dr. Kazana, who helped with the presentation as well as helped with the literature search and helped with the actual presentation development. I want to give a special thanks also to Dr. Susie Miltner, who has also mentored us and supported us throughout this development of this presentation. So big thanks to them. So as we get started, I just want to kind of go over a roadmap on what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes or so. We're going to do welcome introductions. We've just done that with some housekeeping. The nuts and bolts of a good presentation. We'll go through the guidelines, kind of pulling in some of the literature for human factors that can help you with a presentation. Then we'll also transition into how to be successful in that space. So when you're actually presenting the presentation. There'll be a time for question and answers, and we'll do that virtually. We'll provide an email address. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. So any presentation should have clear objectives. If you're doing CME or CE, those have to be explicit. So here are 2 objectives that we want to do this afternoon. Discuss best practices related to developing a poster presentation as well as for a podium presentation. Those kind of guideposts that we're going to try to hit today. So I want to start with kind of the nuts and bolts of a professional presentation, and this work has been adapted with permission from Dr. Shannon Graham as well as work by Ms. Joan Walker. They were colleagues of mine several years ago when we worked on a similar presentation. So I think it's first to normalize. So the question to ask yourself is, what is your greatest fear? Death or public speaking? And for some people, they might honestly raise their hand for public speaking. So which would you rather do? You know, have your nails pulled out, go to the dentist, or get in front of somebody and speak? So that natural reaction, that natural avoidance, those butterflies, that is normal. Many people have public speaking right up there with going to the dentist, and so it's completely normal. So how we address that is through structure and process, and we're going to share with you the structure and processes to help reduce your anxiety so you can be successful. So I think always just start out with what's the worst thing that can happen. No matter how bad your presentation bombs, the sun is going to rise in the east tomorrow. So the worst thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to fall out. It's going to be like Charlie Brown teacher up there, and they're like, what happened? So with that as the worst case scenario, we can take a deep breath and focus on what we can control. So how do we avoid that worst case scenario of Charlie Brown's teacher? And there really are 3 pillars that go into a successful presentation: the design, the delivery, and the content. And what you want to do is maximize all 3 so you have the best presentation. So we'll kind of go through each of these as kind of ideas and how to approach them. So starting with content, you want to know what needs to be covered. That gets kind of to your objectives and what you want to talk about. If you go into PowerPoint, you can actually create a storyboard display, so you can move your slides around. It might be nice just to have a big piece of paper and just kind of draw your ideas out. But you want to create a storyboard, and you want to get those ideas out there and see how you're going to sequence them, what the content you're going to cover. So when we talk about design, one of the ideas to keep in mind is that the human brain cannot process 2 forms of verbal information at the same time. So having a bunch of words on the screen and talking, like I'm doing right now, isn't really helpful because people can't listen to me and read at the same time. But what people can do is process images and speech at the same time. So here I have a picture of a camera to get you to think about images, and I'm talking about how you can use images. So be aware that images are powerful. So you want to use graphs and maps and pictures to visually display the meaning as much as possible. but they need to be value added. Don't just have images there to fill the space up. Make sure they're value added. But remember, images are powerful when you're doing your presentation. Got a technical issue. All right. The other idea about design is picking the right font. And I'll be honest, before I got into this, I was like, you mean there's really a difference? But there are differences. So first off, sans serif fonts are ideal. And those would be like your Arial fonts. Tahoma is the font we're actually using for this presentation. And then the size of the font's important. So generally we think about larger than 22 for your bullet points and larger than 16 for any figures or legends. And the idea is you want people to be able to see it from a distance. So, you'll see some people say no less than 24, but again, we want to be, 22, 24, 26. Contrast is important. You want to use high contrast. Avoid red and green for those of us who might be a little colorblind. That would be much appreciated on that. You want to avoid the 3D option for your graphs. I mean, it's really snazzy, but when you put it up there, it's just too much. Try not to have too many colors or shapes. Again, too much detail, you get lost in it. A little trick that they've done here is you'll notice they've actually labeled each graph with a little small, solid green line blue. So this might be your falls rate and your expenditures on FTEs or whatever. But again, labeling the graph so the audience can easily interpret what they're seeing is a great strategy for your design. Special considerations for the podium presentations. Less is more. There are rules out there. You'll see the 6x6 rule where you have no more than 6 words on 6 lines. And if you go to the next web page, you'll find the 7x7 rule, no more than 7 words on 7 lines. But what all these have in common is we're trying to limit the amount of words on a page so we're telling a story. We don't need to have unnecessary clutter. We don't want to overuse the animation if we use it at all, because again, that can be distracting. And you want to, and by keeping images and by keeping fewer words, you're going to be more likely to tell a story than read the slides. And I know we've all been in that presentation where the person turns their back to us and reads the slides to us, and it's actually worse than Charlie Brown's teacher. So when you're thinking about a poster, your frame is you still want to tell a story. But with a poster, you've got about 5 minutes to tell your story. So you want the person to be able to read the poster from about 4 to 6 feet. So again, we're back to that 24 font, no smaller than that for the person to be able to read it. Generally, we read from from left to right and top down. So you want to set your poster up that way. You want to make sure you're using plenty of visual cues to tell the story and limiting text just to keywords. In healthcare, we're notorious for jargon, and especially as we get subspecialties, as we get into our subspecialties. So make sure you avoid the jargon and have a friend or peer who's not in your field review it to make sure all the acronyms are clear and spelled out. There are poster templates out there. Those are very helpful, and we encourage those should be used when available. So I actually found this is in the literature. Dr. Pervelin, I think it was the citation, yeah. Dr. Powell, I'm sorry. Powell published this in 2012, and it's just a conglomerate of all the things that could go wrong with a poster. So when you look at this, it's really just kind of a hot mess. I mean, we've got a title that I can't read. The background is distracting. There's some clip art over here of a mouse or something sitting on a scale. I have no idea what he means. The results are written out. I think a graph would have been better. The font is so small. So thinking about this helps you see what not to do. And so you want your poster to be organized and to tell the story. This is an example of the power of contrast. So the information here is great, but the initial poster you can't tell because it's black on a very dark blue. When they changed it to white on a darker blue, it popped out. So it really stands out for you. Some other tips and tricks with your poster is, the background shouldn't be distracting. So you can see here when they used a very vibrant background, for lack of a better word, and it's distracting. I can't really tell what's going on with the poster. On the other side, they've used a neutral background. It lets the information pop out. Another tip to think about with a poster is the rule of threes. So we naturally gravitate toward three. We like three bullets. We like three columns. So if you can organize your poster in threes, three columns, three rows, three bullets of this, or three data points, or three graphs, those are really appealing to the eye. The other part of the three is a third free space. So the whole poster doesn't need to be filled up. The free space creates boundaries around your information to let it stand out so the person can have time to absorb that information. So again, background, rule of threes, these are all tips to help you with your poster. So we've talked about some of the design, we've talked about the content. Let's talk about delivery. How do we act when we're in that space? So when I think about doing a presentation, these are the 5 kind of bullets, the 5 buckets that I work through when I do a presentation. The first is appreciative inquiry, then beginning with the end in mind, knowing thyself, knowing the audience, and trying your best to be smarter than the object. So the idea of appreciative inquiry is really taken from the arts, where the concept is that there's beauty in everything. So how does this apply to your presentation? Well, from this day forward, I would like for you to always approach presentations and posters with an eye of what worked for you. What can you shamelessly steal that person did, or how do they format a slide or a presentation that you like that you can incorporate into your next presentation? So that idea of appreciative inquiry gets to the point that you simply are on the lookout for neat and innovative ways to do a presentation, things you like, things you can put into your presentation next time. So from here on, just go out with fresh eyes looking for those best practices that you want to adopt. Beginning with the end in mind, this is from Covey's work in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This gets to your objectives. What do you want the learners to do after your presentation? Now, if all presentations need to have clear objectives, they don't have to be explicit. So I may be going to teach my nephew how to drive. I'm not going to have objectives for him, but in my mind, I know today we're going to parallel park. So, but if you're doing a CME or if you're doing a CE, then you're going to have clear, explicit objectives. Bloom's taxonomy is a way to help think through and organize those objectives. The key here is to remember that the objectives must be measurable and they're about the presenter, or about the audience, not the presenter. So at the end, I want the participants to list ... or whatever. There are no hard and fast rules, but a good guideline is that about 3 objectives per hour of content is about all you can truly cover. If you see a list of 6 objectives and you only have 50 minutes, it's going to be hard pressed to adequately cover all those objectives. So when you think about Bloom's taxonomy, the objectives and the action verbs correlate with what the depth or the complexity of what you want your learners to do. So at the very bottom of the scale is just knowledge. I want my learners to define these three terms. And at the top of the scale is evaluation. And the objectives matter, because if my goal is for you to list the 5 parts of our CLAPSI bundle, that's a lot different than me asking you to evaluate a new CLAPSI bundle. So how I word my objectives will guide the type of content and delivery method I'll need to use. As a cheat for many presentations, you'll see everybody's favorite discuss, which is kind of at an application level, but you'll see that done a lot for podium presentations. So beginning with the end in mind, you want to create what your presentation is going to be. Scripts are nice. They're like your friend, but you don't want to be reading a script to the audience. You want to be able to improvise as you go. You're telling a story, and we all love stories by the campfire. So make your presentation a story. Practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the better you are. Practice in front of your dog, in front of your friends. Read, practice in front of the mirror. Record yourself, play it back and watch it. Practice, practice, practice. The other idea that I use is kind of knowing thyself. So kind of what is in my sphere of control here. So first of all, if you're going to do a presentation, pick something you're kind of interested in. If you're bored with it, the audience is going to know. Make sure you do your prep work to know the topic, but as a general rule of thumb, if you're getting up and presenting in front of a group of people, you probably know more about the subject than they do. But you do need to be prepped for questions and think about what those questions might be. As far as your voice, no one wants you screaming at them for an hour, but they also don't want you to be whispering or have a monotone, Fairless Bueller's Day Off monotone voice. So find your voice, use inflections, pull them into your story. As far as gestures, be aware of what's your nervous habit. Do you click the pen? Are you chewing gum? What are you doing that might be distracting for the audience? Do you like to walk around? And if you do you have a cordless mic? Make eye contact with the audience. So before the presentation, if you're nervous, kind of circulate through the room, find 3, 4, 5 people who look warm and fuzzy, and just let them know, hey, I'm going to let you be my warm, fuzzy person, and I may kind of make eye contact with you, and I may need a smile from you from time to time. So that way you have someone to look for in the audience, and you've already set up to get that support you need. Humor is important. You want to find the humor that's appropriate for the audience, but you also want your personality to shine. Making fun of yourself is always appropriate. You don't want to laugh at other people at their expense and tear them down, but find humor. People in presentations always enjoy having some humor to lighten up and to carry them through the story. Do's and don'ts. You do want a glass of water. You don't want a carbonated beverage because we're trying to avoid having any gas or anything to be distracting to the participants. Relax. Relaxing can be as simple as just taking a few deep breaths, making sure you lower your shoulders before you get up there, closing your eyes and taking those deep breaths. Try to feel comfortable. I know you're nervous, but remember you've done your prep work. You've put the presentation together. You've practiced. Make sure you're citing your sources, following whatever format you guys use, if it's APA or whatever. But make sure you have your sources cited, and be aware of copyright law if you're using images or graphs or other illustrations. Again, you don't want to have a carbonated beverage. You don't want to start with an apology. Nobody wants to hear you get up and say, I'm so sorry, this is the worst presentation ever, but we're going to sit through it for 15 minutes. That is usually a turnoff. Please don't read your slides, and please don't lean on the podium. And again, those are things you've probably seen done, and it kind of turns you off to the presentation. So once you know yourself, then you also want to think about, well, who's my audience? Because I want to be prepared for them. So the first little image here of the lion getting dressed, this is dressing the part. So, my rule of thumb is you want to be remembered for your presentation and not what you wore. So for me to wear, a black tuxedo with tails to do a presentation, no one's going to remember what I said. They were talking, why is he wearing a tux to this? But if I'm wearing flip-flops and board shorts, they'll have the same conversation. So you want to dress professionally, probably more on the conservative side. And again, you want to remember your message, not what you wore. The rabbit, of course, is Alice in Wonderland. I'm late. First of all, don't be late. So make sure you allot plenty of time to be there so you won't be stressed. And make sure you're aware of your time. No matter how fascinating your topic is to you, nobody wants to hear you go over the time limit. So if you're to present for 50 minutes, you need to be done at 49 minutes. So make sure you're aware of the time. The guy with all the equipment going on, you want to make sure that you're using AV and all that stuff appropriately for the audience to engage them, but it's not overwhelming to the audience. Can you hear me now? Can they hear you in the back? Make sure you've pointed out a contact person in the back of the room that can verify they can hear you and that's willing to speak up and raise their hand if they're no longer able to. The mic goes out or your voice starts to fade or whatever. And then know your audience, the questions that are going to come. You can set those up with, I have time for 2 or 3 questions. Who has a question? If they ask a question that you don't know the answer to, it's completely appropriate to say, that's an excellent question, and I'm not familiar with the literature or anything, the literature surrounding that question. Perhaps we can talk offline about that. Here's my contact information. But you want to be prepared for questions and set it up to take questions. So that's kind of knowing your audience. And with that, I'm going to close and just say that I hope this has been helpful. We have our QSEN Institute Gmail account. If you have questions about this or anything else about the QSEN upcoming conference, just please reach out to us. Again, I really want to thank my team, and here are my references, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.